Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week. We are back, of course, to ongoing strikes between the United States and the Iranians. I would hesitate to call it all-out war because the U.S. strikes are mostly, though not exclusively, at military targets, and the Iranian strikes in retaliation against U.S. bases primarily, and some limited Gulf infrastructure targets as well. This is a much worse situation than we were in a couple of weeks ago, but it also is considerably more restrained than both sides have the capacity to engage militarily. And for that, I suppose, we can be thankful. The principal problem here, I have seen this war as in many ways analogous, not to Vietnam, not to Iraq, but to Trump's initial efforts to force the Chinese to capitulate. And it's when he put all of those tariffs in place, essentially a boycott, and the Chinese in return showed that they could squeeze the supply chain to hurt the Americans well beyond what Trump had believed they could or would do, and they did not capitulate. And then Trump backed down, and now U.S.-China relations are much more stable than they had been before. Why is that not happening here? Because the Iranian response was not capitulation, which Trump has expected, and it was showing the United States that they had the ability and willingness to cause a lot more economic pain than the Americans had anticipated. But Trump doesn't fully believe that and doesn't completely think it will continue. So in other words, the leverage with the Iranians believe that they have and have displayed. In the case of China, when they did it, Trump got it immediately and had the same assessment. Here, the Iranians, I think, believe that they are in a much stronger position than Trump believes they are in. Irrespective of who is correct, that reality is leading to further conflict, and there are costs of that further conflict. So I think the problem as it exists right now is that irrespective of what the United States does to Iran, Iran will continue to engage in strikes that will shut down, at a minimum, the Strait of Hormuz. And they have the ability to continue to strike at American bases and critically at essential Gulf infrastructure, and that the Americans cannot adequately protect either. And my understanding is, at a minimum, with strong and coordinated effort, it would take 6 to 9 months to get to the point that the U.S. would be able to ensure that they could defend their Gulf allies from such strikes, put the radar in place, the interceptors in place, improve technology, maybe work with the Ukrainians on drones that can take down Shaheds, all that kind of thing, and defend ships going through the strait. And if that means that the U.S. is going to keep beating on the Iranians militarily because they're unhappy with the outcome, well, you're going to continue to have some level of the strait being closed. So the proximate constraint here is either the United States a second time cries uncle because the economic consequences are too great, or they run out of munitions, tomahawks and the like. They can't maintain the existing strike patterns because they just don't have enough military in the chain. And then they have to build it, and then they go back again. But for now, both the Americans and the Iranians have some capacity, if not to deter, at least to significantly strike back. Now, some bad news and some good news. The bad news is that I believe that Trump's speech from, I want to say last Thursday night, where he addressed primetime the American public to say, hey, midterms, these elections that we just had, the presidential, they were completely stolen back in 2020. It was the Chinese what did it, and that's really bad. I've got all this evidence, and I'm going to show it to you. And then there's a big intel dump, and it doesn't actually show what he says. But why did he do that? Is it really because he's going to steal the midterms coming up? And this is the incentive to go and bring ICE in and get rid of voting machines and all? No, I don't think that's what it is. I think this is Trump understanding that he's going to get pasted in the midterms and not being prepared to accept that outcome and wanting to blame it on external interference. And why is he suddenly doing that now? He's doing that now because he is escalating the war. He is ripping up the memorandum of understanding. Gas prices are now above $4 a gallon on average across the United States. He knows inflation is going to be higher. He knows this is unpopular, and there's no way to get away from that before November. So I think that's the timing there. That's bad news. That implies that Trump gets that he's not going to be able to sell this. So why care about a memorandum of understanding about trying to get a deal so urgently? Got to beat up the Iranians a lot more. The good news is that despite all of that, the United States and the Iranians have both been saying, yeah, we can't trust each other at all. These are horrible people, but we still should be negotiating, because there is a recognition on the part of both governments, even if President Trump isn't necessarily going to follow through, even if the Supreme Leader is maybe undermining at the margins some of what those engaging in negotiations are trying to accomplish. There is a recognition that there's no useful outcome coming through more military strikes, and so you need to get back to some form of ceasefire. Now, I think in the near term, that ceasefire is going to have to require some form of additional money that's going to the Iranians. I don't think that's a toll, but it could be a Dardanelles type solution where there is some fund, and the Iranians, the Omanis, have been engaging in negotiations on that other countries pay into. The Americans don't have to directly. There could be some unfreezing of assets that come from the Emiratis, from the Qataris, from other. That's certainly potentially a component of this. But at least for now, if that doesn't happen, then you're going to continue to have the Strait effectively blocked. Having said that, the Iranians have a wasting asset. They can only charge and leverage their position so much, because in another year, in another 2 years, you're going to have all sorts of resilient infrastructure built that can avoid the Strait. In another year, in another 2 years, you're going to have more hard defenses of critical infrastructure and of ships going through that the Iranians will not be able to pierce. And that means that right now, the billions and billions they can get will be less in a relatively short period of time. That incents the Iranians to be much harder line when they have maximum leverage. Another point that I think the Americans inadequately appreciate, at least President Trump, some of his advisors a little bit different. So that's where we are. One final big question, the Houthis. The Houthis have recently announced that they are also going to have a blockade of the Saudis, and that would certainly be bringing the Saudis directly into this war if it would occur, because they've been able to take millions, over 3 million barrels a day through the Strait of Bab el-Mandab. If that were to get disrupted by the Houthis, then we've got a much more significant economic problem, and you probably see a civil war erupt fully in Yemen with the Saudis fighting against the Houthis. We aren't there yet. We haven't seen that disruption yet, but it could certainly come. The Houthis have the military capability through their drones and ballistic missiles and small boats. They have the ability to disrupt that shipping if they wish to. But they have different interests, not identical interests with the Iranians. And historically, in the last several months, the Saudis have been willing to get money to ensure that these people have opportunities in the future. Will they continue? Is that enough? Stay tuned, as they say. So that's where we are, a lot to follow, and I'll talk with you all real soon.